There we go.
Over me, and before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go to my Lord and be free. Oh, say, oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried. Oh, no more mourning. We'll say mourning. No. Sorry about that. No more mourning. No more mourning. And before I'll be buried and go home to be free. Come on, sing. They'll be singing. They'll be singing, yeah. Listen to me now. They'll be singing. They'll be singing over me. Oh, and before I be a slave, I'll be buried and go together. We'll put our hands together and we'll fight for justice. We'll fight for justice. Standing hand in hand, fighting for justice over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried and go home to my Lord. Come on. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Over me. And before I'll be buried and go to my Lord and be free.
Good evening, everyone. Wow, that was uplifting. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm Bob Hornstein, the Director of Community Relations and Public Affairs of the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland, one of tonight's co-sponsors, along with the Portland Chapter of the NAACP, the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education, and Project Dialogue, an organization headed by my good friend, Barbara O'Hare. I hope that all of you found the Shared Legacies film to be enlightening and inspiring, and of course also timely, because this is a period of national and local reckoning due to our country, state, and city's grim legacy of discrimination and hate. In a recent Washington Post op-ed, Portland NAACP President, Pastor E.D. Mondonay, who is with us tonight, wrote these words: "This is a moment for serious action to once again take up the mantle of the civil rights era by summoning the same conviction and determination our forebears did." In Shared Legacies, you heard about, and in some cases heard the words of, some of those very forebears: MLK, John Lewis, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Dr. Gerald Durley, who is also with us tonight, Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney. You observed the special bond that existed between the Black and Jewish communities during the Civil Rights Movement, a bond that regrettably faded over the ensuing decades among some segments of our respective communities. Yet, I want to tell you that here in Portland, there is a close partnership between many Black and Jewish people who are dedicated to ending systemic racism and combating rising anti-Semitism. You know, over the past 20 years, there have been several organized Black Jewish dialogues. In fact, there will be another one virtually, of course, on Monday night. Many of our rabbis have developed deep friendships with leaders in the Black community. And in the past 2 years, the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Federation, the NAACP, Oregon Jewish Museum, Project Dialogue, as well as other figures in the Black community, Pastors Emmett Wheatfall and Matt Hennessy, have come together to form a coalition under the name United in Spirit. Tonight's discussion is only one of the outcomes of this collaboration. We also hope that you will join us on October 6th at 7 p.m. for Uncovering the Hidden History of Anti-Black Racism in Oregon, featuring author and activist Walida Imarisha. Additionally, we are planning a joint civil rights mission to the American South in October 2021, God willing, to learn in a more intimate manner about the civil rights movement and the straight line from slavery to Jim Crow to mass incarceration. You can learn more about this if you contact the Jewish Federation or the NAACP. Now it is my distinct honor to introduce our two co-moderators for this evening, both of whom I consider not just colleagues, but also friends. Rabbi Michael Kahana joined our Portland community back in 2006, becoming the 18th senior rabbi at Congregation Beth Israel in Northwest Portland. Leading synagogues in the Midwest and the East Coast, Rabbi Kahana has strived to create a vibrant and inclusive Jewish community. He also serves on various community boards and interfaith councils and is a past president of the Oregon Board of Rabbis. And not surprisingly, Rabbi Kahana is also highly engaged in social action. He is on the leadership team of Lift Every Voice Oregon, an interfaith movement to pass gun safety legislation in this state. He also serves on the board of Cedar Sinai Park, which is our senior campus, and is an at-large member of the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Federation. When you came on this evening, you heard that clip, that beautiful clip. That was from Beth Israel's annual Friday night MLK service, Friday night leading into MLK weekend. And let me tell you, if you've never been there, if you haven't attended, you are missing just a remarkable experience with fabulous speakers and a gospel choir singing alongside Beth Israel's own choir. I don't know how they're going to do it this year, hopefully virtual, but it is not to be missed. Our other co-moderator is Pastor E.D. Mondonay. There are so many things to say about Pastor Mondonay: philanthropist, activist, entrepreneur, having founded Poshine's restaurant in North Portland, author, civil leader, musician, having recorded 4 albums. And of course, he is the president of Portland's NAACP chapter since March of 2018. He holds the office of apostle within the Christian faith, and he serves 2 congregations. He's the senior pastor at a congregation in St. Louis and also Portland's own Celebration Tabernacle Church, a non-denominational organization that Pastor Mondene founded back in 1988. Since its inception, Celebration Tabernacle has been a social and spiritual force in both the Christian community and also the secular community. And I can say this from personal experience about Pastor Mondene. When this man sings, he touches your soul. And when he speaks, he will touch your heart. We are privileged to have both of these gentlemen with us tonight. Now, just a quick housekeeping. The chat function tonight, as you might have realized, has been turned off. When we get to the Q&A later in the program, and you can wait until then to ask any questions of the panel, you can use the Q&A function, and we'll repeat that as we get closer to that part in the program. I now want to call on my colleague, Judy Margles, the director of the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education, to continue with the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's really a delight to be here. I just really want to start my very brief remarks by extending my sympathies to those of you who have felt the impact of the wildfires. I'm holding the possibility of renewal, which comes with the Jewish New Year beginning on Friday night. I'm hoping that this possibility of renewal will sustain all of us during these rather grim times. And of course, as Bob was saying, Portland in particular has really been at the center of this movement for racial justice. So I think that showing the film Shared Legacies, holding this conversation, certainly brings to the fore the opportunities and challenges we face when promoting the values of equity and inclusion. In addition to Rabbi Kahana and Pastor Mondene, we are so fortunate to also welcome 2 additional esteemed speakers. I'm really making rather quick introductions, and I know that our additional speakers will talk further about themselves. I'm first going to introduce Dr. Sherry Rogers, the director of the film. Sherry, if you want to wave. Sherry is also a licensed clinical psychologist, social activist, president and founder of Spill the Honey, which is committed to promoting human dignity as well as advancing public knowledge of the Holocaust and the civil rights movement through programs, sponsored initiatives, and strategic partnerships that bring Jewish and Black communities together. I think I'm just gonna I think what we'll do is we're gonna just show a short clip about our next speaker, Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley. See, I made you a rabbi already, and we're hardly 5 minutes into the program. And then I will give some brief biographical remarks. So if we can show the clip now, thank you.
Good people don't finish last. He was one that had an infectious smile, but he never ended with a smile. It always turned into a laugh, and he recruited you into the C.T. Vivian camp.
Vivian worked closely with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and was awarded the Medal of Freedom in 2013 by President Barack Obama. He passed away last Friday at the age of 95, the same day as the passing of fellow civil rights leader, Congressman John Lewis.
Thank you. So you were listening to Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley. Dr. Durley is the pastor emeritus of the Providence Missionary Baptist Church in Atlanta. He holds a number of degrees. Honestly, I lost count trying to get them all from your bio. But foremost, Dr. Durley holds a doctorate in urban education and psychology and a Master of Divinity, which he sought after recognizing the decaying moral, social, cultural, and family value systems throughout this country. This concern compelled him to enroll at the Howard University School of Divinity and to earn a Master of Divinity. While serving as pastor, first at the Mount Olive Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., next at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, and then spending 25 years at Providence Missionary Baptist Church, Reverend Dr. Durley became intensely involved in climate change, global warming, and environmental justice movements. Reverend Dr. Durley now combines the discipline of faith and science with the lessons learned as a civil and human rights advocate from the 1960s. He has received numerous distinguished awards. I'm just going to name two. One was the White House Champion of Change Award, and the other was the W.E.B. Du Bois NAACP Award of Distinction. And as you just saw from that clip, on July 23rd of this year, Reverend Dr. Durley delivered a powerful eulogy for C.T. Vivian, who you all saw in the film's Shared Legacies. So we're going to have a moderated conversation with our four esteemed panelists. And I think I'll turn first to Sherry, the director of the film, and ask the question, what were your motivations in making this film? And perhaps in answering the question, you might also talk about the challenges that you felt existed as you were moving forward. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank everybody in Portland, Oregon for hosting this. I'm so grateful. I just think Portland, Oregon is an example of every state and of the Jewish community that has historically on Martin Luther King Day and on a grassroots level just revered and looked up to Dr. King. And we look to Dr. King as a prophet, and we identify with his struggle, we identify with him. And part of my motivation was to honor what we all feel when we celebrate Dr. King. And going back to 2013, I was at the Charles Wright Museum in Detroit, Michigan. I live in Detroit. And Dr. Clarence B. Jones was speaking on a book he had just written. It was called What Would Martin Say? He was Dr. King's personal attorney and draft speech writer. And he was chosen by Claiborne Carson at Stanford to represent Dr. King's legacy. So one of the chapters he was speaking on happened to be on anti-Semitism. And as a Jewish woman standing in the audience, it was just amazing for me to hear him speak about how much Dr. King cared about the Jewish people and how he personally asked Dr. Jones to be the person to speak out at the time he used the word Negro brothers. If our Negro brothers ever someday say anything negative about our Jewish brothers, he said, I know you, Clarence, will be the one to remind our Negro brothers of the 24/7 commitment of the Jewish people to our struggle. And being a person who was in the audience, I was just really taken by that. And I also knew how much, the Jewish people just loved Dr. King. And so I developed a friendship with Dr. Jones. And President Obama was president at the time, and Dr. Jones was honored at the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts. And once again, he was speaking about, and the Obamas came there, and Dr. Jones was speaking about the Jewish people among everything else. So fast forward, it was 2015. It was the anniversary from the Selma and Montgomery March. And Dr. Jones called me, he said, President Obama, I was just in the White House, and he invited me. He said, I hope you're gonna be at the 50th anniversary. And he said, of course I'm gonna be. And so I thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to start filming right in Selma, where we all came together, that eventuated in the Voting Rights Act. So we filmed, so that's where we started filming, right at the anniversary from the Selma and Montgomery March. And I feel proud to have gotten the record of the Black and Jewish civil rights leaders who were part of this history, the lions, if you will, who, that I basically was able to film their personal stories and what they witnessed during that time. And I think what was really powerful at the end of the film, you see Congressman John Lewis, he says, we are all living in fear. And if Martin Luther King were alive today, and if Rabbi Heschel were alive, they would be pulling together for those generations yet unborn. So it's my hope that while there's grassroots organizations going on in every state in Black-Jewish relations, that it's now the time to pull together and work on really finally ending racism. And I think we both have a stake in our own history, the Jewish people thousands of years. Our central narrative is our own slavery, and not only the idea of using our slavery to overcome. And I think that's exactly where the Black community is. And I think by pulling together that we can actually accomplish this. And I just want to say, I'm so honored to have Reverend Gerald Durley as a part of this panel. He is, you know, amazing. He's the example of somebody who just spills love over everybody, and he just brings people together. And can you imagine that President Obama said Reverend C.T. Vivian was the most important reverend that ever lived, and he chose Reverend Durley as his reverend. So we are just blessed here to have somebody of this esteemed man who is really giving testimony to the importance of this coalition and how it's time for us to all come together to really end racism and fight for equality and justice, but do it in a loving, coalitional partnership way. So Reverend Durley.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. First of all, let me thank you. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia right now, and it's after 10 o'clock. And after 10 o'clock, when you get to be my age, you're getting ready to kind of nod to the left and to the right. But when she started singing that song, "Oh, Freedom," freedom over me, and I saw Jews and African Americans and so many people coming together, it inspired me even more. It took me back. I sit here and it touched the very essence of my being. And the more she sang, the more I remembered. I met John Lewis when I was 18 years old. He was 19 and a half. And there was an old man that was trying to help us learn the movement. He was old man, he was 34 years old. His name was C.T. Vivian. This was 1960 in Nashville, Tennessee. I had grown up in Denver, Colorado, and I did not know all of the kinds of things that were going on as far as the discriminatory patterns and all the laws of the segregated South. So in 1960, I caught a bus merely to play basketball, going down to Nashville, Tennessee, to stop for a few years and then go play professional basketball. But on the bus, I'll never forget, when I got to the Tennessee state line, the bus driver came and grabbed me by my neck and said, "Come sit behind the white line." And I thought he was giving me a compliment because I was 6'4" and a half, and he didn't want me to be crowded in the front of the bus. I didn't know. When I got to the Greyhound bus station, I got ready to drink some water, and the man grabbed me and said, "Look, you drink out of that water fountain for colored people." I said, "That water fountain is filthy." He said, "You drink out of that, you don't drink out of this." And then I began to understand the whole segregated pattern. And now after 60 years, I'm seeing some of the same kind of insurgents come around. But during that time, I stayed at Tennessee State and became student government leader, led all of the students in 1963 to the March on Washington. Many people ask us, what was the energy that we had in the civil rights movement that I think must be exemplified today? And there were two words that kept us going. We were willing to sacrifice and we were willing to risk. And when you think about it, when you look at the Jewish community, they were always willing to sacrifice and they were willing to risk. They were willing to go beyond their zones of comfort and reach out and touch other people to accomplish the common goal and respect of each other. And at that time, they wondered, why would we do that? Why would we want to give up what we had? But we weren't giving up anything because the cause is always greater than the individual. And Dr. King always taught us, if one of us is still locked up, we're all locked up. So I began to march all through that time, marching through 62, 63, 64. Then I found out America was too racist for me and I couldn't take it any longer. And I came back from the March on Washington in 1963. All the students were gathered and we were getting ready to march, and we heard a shooting that occurred in November 22nd, and it was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. So I had to do the address for all the students for Kennedy's eulogy that year. And then I left America. I refused to live here. It was too racist for me. So I moved to Nigeria in 1964 and stayed there for 2 years and tried to come back to America, and they wouldn't let me in. And eventually we came back. I say all of these things not so much about me, but there is a certain kind of energy that when you're young and when you're idealistic and when you believe in something, you live for it. And I think that that's what this film is generating now, where we've got to have the shared legacies. And I love the word united in spirit, because it's the spirit that will keep us moving. Not all the political nuances and all the craziness that's going on at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but it'll be the spirit of well-meaning people, well-intentioned people, to put their egos on the altar and destroy their egos there. So I came back to America. Then I went on and got right back into the movement, working in the streets in Washington, D.C., went on to school, finished a master's at Illinois, a doctorate from University of Massachusetts, and another master's from Howard University. That's when I began to understand that we're in an ethical, moral, spiritual warfare. And that was one of the things that I began to understand, how when we began to move in the 60s, many times I didn't know that these were Jewish people. I just thought they were other white people. We didn't know whether they were Jews or not, but we did know when Bernard Lafayette or John or any of us, when we moved down to the Freedom Rise in '61 in Nashville and going down to the schools in Mississippi, they were right in there with us, Swerner and the others. And we found out that there was a bond. And I think that that's a bond that this film is trying to, once again, we thank Dr. Rogers for it, to bring us back together, to begin to look at it. What happened? In order for something to go on, what happened at one time, we were communicating. And communication is predicated upon three primary principles. Do we understand each other? Do we respect each other? And can we trust each other? Somewhere along this journey, we are misunderstanding. We fell into our own little silos. We started not understanding each other. We felt that the Jews are doing this and the black folks are doing this, and then the nationalists came involved, and we began to separate, even though we had common backgrounds of sacrifice and risk. So we've got to come back once again to begin to understand each other. But in order to understand each other, we've got to realize now that we don't really understand each other because we've separated so much. So we've got to go back. How do you do that? First of all, by what we saw in the Shabbat service and coming together and singing together, but then doing social things together. It's not always about sitting in some meeting and going around who suffered the most. We got to get out of the spitting contest. We've got to come back that we're all suffering when any of us are discriminated against, whether it's anti-Semitism or institutional racism. So now as we come back, we've got to understand each other and then respect our differences. We will always be different. I've been married 52 years, and I'm so thankful that my wife is different than me. Had I married me, I would have stayed married about 3 weeks. But it's the difference that gives us our strength. There's a difference between the Jewish community and the black community, but when we come together, and that's what Rabbi Heschel and Martin Luther King understood. So the respect. And then the key, this is really key for as we move into 2020, we've got to once again begin to reestablish that trust, that no one is any greater than anybody else. Dr. King used to say we're all equal when we come together with one common goal in mind, and that is the freedom and the equality and the justice issue. So I think that as we go through this now, and as we begin to sit and we begin to sing, and we really got to go back to with our children. I feel more optimistic now as I see the young people out in the streets, and they're using social media as they're coming together, but there is something more generic in there. They are beginning to look at each other as human beings. And I think when we do that, and I think that that's where the Jews and the African Americans and others can come together, the different faiths, where we can come together and begin to understand that we're all created in the image of Jehovah. We're all created in the image of God. God created us all in one blood. And that was a difficult. Was I nonviolent? No, I was not nonviolent. Neither were any of us nonviolent. But John used to always talk about it. When we put SNCC together, I wasn't ready for that. But we had to understand, and Martin would tell us that we've got to understand that we've got to understand each other, respect each other, and then build bonds of trust. And when we begin to do that, then the nonviolent movement can once again come back into being. And I think that that's where we are now, the development. But we've got to open that dialogue and begin to communicate. And I don't mean kumbaya meetings. I mean hard line discussion. Then we've got to come together as two communities once again and legislate. And Pastor Montagne knows that the NAACP in 1909 was founded. The Jewish people right in there, writing some of the guidelines. When we were down there in the South in 1960, many of the people that came down, much of the legal work was done in the Jewish community. Many of those that came from the North were down there walking right alongside of us in the freedom schools. And we began to come kind of a bonding. And when we went up to Tennessee to study together, we were ostracized, we were criticized. But I'm convinced if everything is coming your way, you're in the wrong lane. And sometimes we got to look for good trouble every now and then. And we looked at that. Right now in 2020, the time is right for us not to bend, not to bow, not to break, not to back up. But even in Portland, as it's going, what you're doing there now, you become the role model for what the city can be and what the nation is moving towards. So I'm just so thankful to be here tonight. I feel so strange because I'm the kid in the group. Martin is gone. Andy is still here. Andy is 88. I met Andy when I was 18. My next birthday, I'll be 79 years old. That's how I've been on the battlefield for 60-something years, and I don't feel no way tired. And we've got to tell our young people, they cannot get tired. None of us in Portland and all the groups today, we cannot get tired because this is our time. This is our moment. And because what you're doing now, because of what this film will do, shared legacies, shared legacies. When we share that legacy, when we can communicate, when we understand, as Dr. King says, love will pass out all kind of darkness and all kind of hate. And it's that bonding that will make a difference. So I'm just pleased and thankful that's what you're doing there, because it always starts with one person, one group, one individual, one faith, and then it begins to grow. And if you think I'm kidding, look at the wildfires. They say it's just an ember. An ember can start a wildfire. And that's what we're about now in 2020. Let's burn together. Let's burn down all the racism and the anti-Semitism and all these things. Let's be a roaring human fire to make a difference in 2020. Thank you.
Oh,
Beautiful.
wonderful metaphor. Thank you so much. And I was tearing up as you were talking. So perhaps we can turn to Rabbi Kahana and Pastor Mondane. And I'd love you both to sort of talk about how you saw the film in today's context. You can't watch the film Shared Legacies and put yourself back in the 60s, given what's going on. And of course, I think as everyone knows, both Pastor Mondane and Rabbi Kahana have been at the protests many, many times. So given your own actions with the protest movement, talk a little bit about your reaction to the film and how you see its importance in context of what's going on today. Rabbi Kahana, why don't you
Thank you, Judy. Should I start?
Sure.
Thank you, Judy, and Dr. Durley. Thank you so much. I'm always inspired, and you know, when you bring the preaching, that's what really makes the difference. I think we have one of the things that we lose so often is the intellectual approach, the rational approach. And there's reason and there's place for it, but when you speak to the heart, and it is the heart that motivates, and it's the heart that motivates change. We learned that from this movement, and I continue to be inspired by that. And thank you, Dr. Rogers, for making this film. It was a remarkable experience for me watching this film because. It spoke very much to my family story, and it spoke to my personal life experience. Seeing that film, I saw many colleagues and friends that I know now. Some of the elders of that group, Rabbi Everett Gendler, Dr. Eugene Borowitz of blessed memory, who was my thesis advisor in rabbinic school, and some of my the people who've really inspired me in more recent years, Ambassador David Saperstein, Rabbi Jonah Pesner, some amazing people that I've had the privilege of coming in contact with and getting to learn from. My story is my family story, which this film really spoke to me about. Is important. I come from a family. My mother was a Holocaust survivor. She was in Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. And my father, blessed memory, both of them are gone now, but my father was born in Israel, fought against the British for independence, and came to the United States, became a rabbi in Houston, Texas, and got caught up in the civil rights movement as a righteous ideal. And he always said that it was out of the inspiration of my mother's experience, knowing what the Jews experienced in Holocaust, knowing where hatred leads, knowing where racism leads. We Jews do not have the right to stand idly by while our neighbor bleeds. We don't have the right to stand idly by while we bleed. We have to be engaged. He saw this as a Jewish obligation that came directly from Torah. And it was our responsibility to be there. So Rabbi Gendler in the movie talked about a number of rabbis who were at a conference in New Jersey and said, what are we doing here? Dr. King is calling. And they left that conference, got on a plane, and went down to Selma. And my father was one of those on that plane, and one of those who marched. And he said for the rest of his life, he talked about that experience, meeting Dr. King, marching with Dr. King, being present in that moment. He saw that as one of the great experiences of his life.
Wow.
He saw it as his responsibility coming back to Houston, Texas, to meet with other clergy, Catholic, Protestant, Baptists, and together to form coalitions of clergy members who would continue to bring that story forward. He felt that it was, they felt that as a coalition of friends who had begun to build up that understanding, respect, and trust that Dr. Durley spoke about so profoundly. They had built that up among themselves, and they shared it from church, to synagogue, to mosque. They went around, and anybody who would listen to them and talk about what their experiences were, and talk about how they could cross ideological, religious, historic lines, which was unusual at that time. This is, you know, where we talk about that and we see it as common that we can come together, but incredibly unusual that clergymen of different faiths would come together in that way. In fact, I have a newspaper headline with a picture of my father, and it says, Houston clergymen march with Negroes. It was so unusual that it was a headline. But here it was. This was clergy. These were people of God. These were people who were inspired, who spoke from their own place and their own religious identities, the differences in their religious identities, but came together for justice. And that march for freedom didn't end in 1963 or 1964. And with the assassination of Dr. King, many felt that everything was broken and that there was so much left to do. But we can't rely just on those giants of past ages. We appreciate, Dr. Durley, how much energy you have and how much you are ready to go forward. But we have to learn from your inspiration, and it is on us to carry it forward today. That is happening, you are exactly right, on the streets of Portland, Oregon today. That is happening all over our country. And as we are seeing the stories of racial injustice, the stories of systemic racism, the stories of Black people being murdered by police all over the country is not something that can be hidden any longer. It can't be, it's not something that happens in the dark. It's not quiet. It's on YouTube. It's on Facebook. It's on TikTok. These videos move all of us profoundly, move us into the streets. We have to be in the streets at this point. We cannot deny. People always want to say, well, it's not as bad as they're making it out. That was the case in Dr. King's time. They can't say that the people have been protesting enough already. It's time to stop protesting. They said that to Dr. King as well. They said it to Dr. Durley. They said it to all of those people. Enough already. You made your point. We've signed a piece of paper. It's time to move on. It's not time to move on. We have to keep marching. We have to keep moving. And I I do think there's lots to talk about the protests that are happening here in Portland, and it's complicated. And there is a lot that is distracting us from the realities of the moment. And Pastor Mondane, in his Washington Post editorial, really spoke to that and spoke to the nation. We can't be distracted by those who want to make distractions, who throw up another shiny object and say, go pay attention to this. We have to keep our eyes on systemic racism in our nation. And it's not going to be one piece of legislation, and it's not going to be one conversation. It is a problem that has to be addressed at its very core. We have to rethink what policing means in our nation when it's an institution that was created to return slaves to their masters. We have to rethink all education. We have to rethink healthcare. We have to rethink all of the institutions of our country that have been predicated on exclusion. And it's time to talk about inclusion. It's time to see that we are all children of God, and we're all created in God's image. And none of us can rest while any of us are oppressed. Thank you.
Pastor Mondane.
I throw the baton to you, sir.
It is an honor to be here this evening, and I am so excited to be in the same room with the light that I see from Dr. Durley and from Dr. Rogers, and with my colleague, Rabbi Kahana, and those that are with me in this fight in the United Justice realm. I am certainly glad to know that this voice and this period of time that God has given me is certainly instrumental in bringing forth peace and bringing towards justice that which our clarion criers called out for over 60 years ago and were all murdered systemically and intentionally to hush the voice of progress. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel spoke these words. He said that racism is a man's greatest threat. Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for a minimum of reason. And then Rabbi Arthur Herzberg termed the relationship between African Americans and our Jewish constituents as the comradeship of excluded peoples. The Black and Jewish relationship is founded on this common thread of oppression. Both groups of powerful peoples bound to powerlessness and victims of persecution, both included in the ranks of American tyranny of intolerance. We are in a very special place at an unprecedented time in our country. We will never see this opportunity again center itself that we might stand against this perplexed and complex disease of racism and annihilate it. We are in two pandemics. We are serving the pandemic of COVID-19 and the pandemic of racism. We are at a place right now in history, and I think that Portland is ground zero, and the perfect storm being the whitest city in America and the only state in our union that was incepted on racism. I think that there's an important story that has to be told here, and we are the people to tell it. The powerful bond between the Jewish brethren and the Black brethren is now time to stand again and begin to fight the fight that we started 60 years ago. I'm happy to be in this circle of light, and I'm happy to be born in this period of time where we can see the justice that we thought we'd arrived at continue that great march up towards Hallelujah Way. and that we can all sing together the song finally that rests on the shoulders of those great men that have and women that have gone on before us, that said, not only will we overcome, but we have overcome. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation this evening.
Thank you so much. So maybe I'll just throw a question perhaps out to all of you. So what, when you're reflecting about the civil rights movement in the 1960s, and you're thinking about what's going on today, what was the unfinished business from the 1960s that you think is actually going to happen today? I've heard many people say we are simply in an extraordinary moment. For the people I've spoken to who were on the streets in the Deep South during the 1960s, they say this is very different, and this could actually finish the business. Do you, I guess, do you have hope? And where do you think this movement is going to go? And I'll just, I would love all of you just to talk at once and talk amongst yourselves.
Well, I think this is a very, very pronounced time of hope. We didn't really know, and Andy would say it better than most, we did not have all the kinds of tools that the people have today. We would have a Gestetner machine and have to type out things, and would you meet it? We might have 10 or 15 people. We've often said if all the people who claimed to march with Dr. King really were there, we would have had a landslide. But there's always only a few people that are there. This time there are massive numbers. And even now, as I work with the Black Lives Matter people here in Atlanta, Georgia, I can say to them, it's one thing to put 10,000 people on a corner, but what do you do with those 10,000 people? They say, we want to be heard. And I say, heard by who? A dog will listen to you. You got to know who you want to listen to you, what you want to say, and how do you hold them accountable for what you said and ask of them. So it's a matter now of pulling from the 60s into this generation and not telling them what to do, but using their energy and all of their technology to meet the masses. We saw that with Obama in 2007 when we traveled with him, is that he could bring more people out with just a text or an email or with social media. So I think it's a matter of bringing those two things together, but now the optimism is so strong because those of us, we had two things that I think that just fuel institutional racism: ignorance and fear. I don't mean stupidity, but ignorance. And ignorance means I just don't know who you are. These young people today did not come up in the forced segregation times that we came up in, so they're understanding each other in a better way. Along a lot of lines. So I think that gives me a lot of hope that they're starting early enough and they're doing it, and they're learning how to use the media to cross line. Plus, they are not afraid. We were really afraid. I was afraid to get kicked out of school. I was afraid to go to jail. I was afraid. We were afraid. They don't have that same kind of fear, because when they move out and they stand boldly, as they're doing in Portland and other cities around the country. So the optimism that I have now that we see is that they're drawing from the past. As I tell them, you will never do what we did. That was our time. We did what we had to. You've got to do what you've got to do, given the parameters that you have. So therefore, it's a new time. It's a new paradigm that they're using. And I think that they're going to make a major difference.
I believe that those that are standing are very necessary, and the noise is necessary. You know, Jesus went through, when he came into the city of Damascus, I believe, he was riding on a donkey and they were singing Hosanna. They were trying to get the noise quelled, and he said to them, even the rocks and stones themselves would begin to sing. When we see the blood of the brothers cry from the ground, when we see the voices of oppression and the heinousness of injustice displayed, the voices are going to begin to cry out. And that's what we're saying right now. Even though the experience of oppression and the heinousness of the young people that study Judaism or that They haven't seen that from their ancestry. They've only understood it. And where the African Americans have not experienced as much of the inclusion or the discrimination that was encountered by those that stood in the streets of Selma. I see that now we have an opportunity to partner together, arm in arms, and to move the needle finally towards justice. And I don't think that it's going to stop. I think that we're not going to stop until we've gotten to that finish line. And I'm glad that we're in such a time as this. In 2016, we had a president that went into the White House where we thought we had no roaches. And he turned on a light in the kitchen, and boy, did we see roaches begin to scatter. If President Trump did nothing else for us, he turned on the light, and we saw that we have roaches. But this new generation of Generation Zers and those that are the millennials, they are the exterminators, and we're going to show them how to exterminate. We're in a good time right now.
Amen.
Amen,
Amen.
brother. Amen, brother.
Yeah.
I share the optimism of these incredible leaders. I think that we are, and especially as we look at our youth, the young people today, and they're the future. They're building it. I think with the work that we're doing right now is just kind of using whatever skills we've gained over these past years. But this is their movement, and the discrimination makes no sense. It doesn't compute in any way. And in the generation before them, we were too ready to say, that's the way it is. It's just the way it is. I don't want to know about it. In the civil rights era, it was what much of the country said, well, that's happening in the South. That's not us. We're good people. We're not racist. I mean, how would I be racist? I don't even know any black people, right? It's a line from the movie. This generation knows in their bones, it's them. It is us. It is a problem of our society. It's not happening somewhere else. The murder of Black men in particular is happening in our community. It's happening all the time. And we can't shut our eyes to it. We don't have the ability to shut our eyes to it anymore. And that's what's new. Look, Dr. King didn't think that the work was over. There was much work that needed to be done, and much work has been done, but it is this new generation that are incredibly passionate, incredibly clear-eyed.
Yeah.
We know the world is going to change because it's their world.
And perhaps, Dr. Rogers, we can move back even to a younger group. I know you've been doing a lot of work in the high schools with Jewish kids and Black kids. Do you want to talk about your experience working with students and what you're seeing as how students are reacting to the conversation? How high school students?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important what this movie has done for the college students. Blake Weissman is the national president of we have a foundation called Spill the Honey Foundation. And basically, we've been showing this film to college students throughout America and having webinar discussions. And both the Jewish community and the Black community know very little about this history. But I think, especially during this time of the nation looking at racism, and how we've all been isolated, I think it's giving us an opportunity to really have real conversations and get proximate, even though we're not physically connected like we were before COVID. We want to get real right now. I mean, it's important to have these deep conversations about how we can attend to each other, how we can be allies for each other, how we can actually show up for both of each other. So the Jewish people are asking the Black students or whatever, and many of our Black young college students are also Jewish. So that's a whole nother new generation of of leaders that can help us understand the complexity of racism and anti-Semitism. But I think the most important thing is how can we be proximate together, and how can we learn from each other and show up for each other's pain. And I think by really connecting to each other's pain, we can become greater allies and move the needle forward. So I think there's so much hope and excitement about this idea of connecting to each other and realizing the dream of Dr. King's beloved community and working together to end finally racism together. But it's exciting because I think the students are enjoying connecting to each other and learning that they have this shared history prior, and they want to work together today to figure out how they can move and help each other, how to become better allies.
You know, I'm in concert with Rabbi Kahana's sentiments concerning Dr. King. He told us in '64, he said that there was an unsettling force that was going to be loosed upon the shores of America. And it was going to be not only about civil rights, but it was going to be about human rights. You have a different poor man today. You no longer have that indigenous non-intellect. You have a blue-collar worker that has gotten used to suburbia and his 2 children and his wife at home that is only a paycheck away from houselessness. So you have a different voice now that we are having to fight for. So we're finding that our young Jewish constituents find it necessary to fight with those that have been excluded and left out and not privileged as they've learned to be as white people in our society. And I want to tell you this, when you stir from the bottom, guess what? Everybody rises. And it's always the grassroots movements like we're seeing today that will last and become the empowering pivotal point, the bulwark for us moving forward an agenda. And I tell you, in this revolution that we're in, we're going to see the change that we need to see. I know that we will, because the time is right for it.
So that's a good segue. I wanted to, oh, sorry. I want to make sure that we leave time for Q&A from the folks that are participating. We have.
Can I make one comment? One comment?
Yes,
Please.
and then we'll start with that.
I'll tell you what I'm excited about. For the last 8 or 9 years, I've been deeply involved in climate change, eco-justice, and global warming. And right now, one virus has shut down the world. But it's shut down in the sense that it's causing conversations like this, where we're coming together. And the reason that we're coming together right now, because we're getting ready to face a pandemic that's going to be so large, there's no respecter of color. Fire doesn't know whether you're black or white or Jewish. Neither do floods. It's all. So now if we've got to come together now in our safe spacing, in our homes, learning to appreciate each other, even in families and even in school settings and in our various religions, to get ready for the big one that's coming when oceans are rising up and hurricanes and tsunamis. We are then going to have to come together as one human race. And this is a precursor, I think, if we take advantage. That's why I think that when we talk about shared legacies, we're sharing something now from a physical context and a health context. And right now, I believe a lot of white folks are beginning to understand what we said. The education is being challenged, economics is being challenged, and healthcare. We've been saying it a long time. But look, isn't it interesting how Jehovah has brought us all right back to that same point to get ready for living under in an environment. We are the caretakers of the earth, but how can we caretake it if we don't even care for one another? Once we start caring for one another, then we can care for the planet that God gave us. And that's why this is a beautiful time preparing us for the big pandemic.
So that's a great segue. This is how it's going to work. There's a Q&A section bottom of your screen. If you have a question, please type it in. Judy and I will moderate these questions so that you can ask questions of any of the panelists. And we're going to start with, all of you have spoken about that this is the turning point. We need to come together, and yet we also know that we're a very divided society. So I guess the question that I've seen from a couple folks is how do we keep making progress on these issues when we are so divided? When there are those, for example, on the right who seize on every instance of violence, and that's to the detriment of the Black Lives Matter movement. So how can we keep moving forward given the divisions in our country right now?
Well, I think it starts with conversation, and we like the conversations that we have at United. I'm really messing up our name here. I tell what it is, Bob. United. Are you
United in Spirit? United in Spirit.
United in Spirit. Okay. The conversations that we're having in United in Spirit, we're going to have more deliberate conversations with our communities as a whole, and begin to talk about what it looks like to move forward in this time and how we can assist one another. One of the things I keep hearing is allies. Well, allies are good, and that's all wonderful, but what we need right now is accomplices. An ally will go with you to the gate, but an accomplice will go with you into the battlefield. So we're looking for people to become accompanists, and they're going to have to learn how to accompany each other in the struggles that we're having right now in this new unsettling force.
And you make such a good point. I'd like to, and guess what? Before we can begin to talk, before the Jewish community and the Black community can come together, the Black community or the Jewish rabbis have got to speak to their congregations, and we have to speak to our congregation, because there are a lot of Black folks don't want to be bothered with Jews, and a lot of Jews don't want to be bothered with Black folks. And so we've got to begin to educate in our separate camps so that when it comes together, we can have that kind of bonding. When I speak to, I'll never forget, I spoke to the Green Academy here in Atlanta, and the little Jewish kid said, the first question that the little boy asked me, why do you Black people hate us? Ooh. He was like in the 3rd or the 4th grade. And then we had to sit down. I said, no, I don't hate you. We don't hate you. So we've got to go back, because there are so many myths that have been put out as we begin to separate and go in different directions about who were the Jews. I had to go to the Holocaust Museum 2 or 3 times to understand the in-depth of pain for me to even grow to that point. And I think, so the rabbis and the pastors and other leaders have to begin to say, hey, you cannot make those kinds of statements about those people. I know in the anti-Semitic group, Greenberg, he always says that we now are responsible for our neighbor's keepers. So we've got to start in our own home bases and then make a concerted effort to come back together. Otherwise, it'll still be that kind of combative kind of attitude. So I believe that, as I said, communication is so important, but we've got to start in our own camps and feel comfortable in our own skin, because there's so much distrust, so much inferiority, complex feelings when people make statements, well, the Jews, they run this, they got their own money, they got, no. They're running this, they run the media, and all of these, and I say, let's look at that. So that then they can say, all right, well, let me go across and let me share. And I think that's the communication starts in our individual camp, getting strong enough so that we don't feel less than when we come in. Or we don't have to feel that we have to prove something. When you're comfortable in your own skin, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. So when we get that, we can come in and then speak as brothers and sisters under one God.
Yeah, I want to echo that, just because you're so right. I mean, if we even think about Dr. King, here he was in solitary confinement in the Birmingham jail, and amongst everything else about that amazing letter about how he would like to see his kids at the amusement park and how he wasn't going to wait. He was saying how if he would have been in Nazi Germany, he would have broken the legal laws for his Jewish brothers for what they were going through. He as Susanna Heschel says, that after Nazi Germany and our Bibles were thrown in the fire, and it was Dr. King who lifted us up and talked about Moses and talked about the Old Testament and the Exodus story and revitalized the important Jewish narrative. So it was Dr. King supported the Jewish community, and it was, as my girlfriend Brenda Rosenberg talks about, this relational equity. It was the shared compassion and understanding that we each need each other's support. We need the Black community to support us as much as we want to be there for the Black community. It's a shared connection. And that's what I think can really help. It's not, it's like we need, in the movie it says, it's not about feeling sorry for poor souls. We both need each other to survive, and we both need to connect to each other. And that's why these conversations are so important.
And as much as Dr. King was for the Jewish, Dr. King caught hell in 1967 because the Black community began to turn on Dr. King because he was reaching out and moving into other areas. So that's why I say we have to be strong and comfortable in our own areas and then come together. And Dr. King understood that. He was asking the question the last 5 years of his life. He was going almost into depression. He said, what am I doing? I'm trying to lift everything. And he had to come back, and many of us were questioning, where was he? C.T. Vivian was the real blood and in that. And C.T. Vivian would always he would sit back, and I've never heard him say a negative word about anyone. And he would always say, let's look at that another way. But he died at 96 years old a few weeks ago. So it was that kind of, that balance between, and then Hosea Williams would be out there firing the crowd up. And then Andy would be the mediator. So everybody would have a different role, but the role was how do we strengthen those in our own camp so that when we come together, we can come as equals to understand that we have a common bond for justice and equality.
I just want to say, since you bring up Hosea Williams, when I interviewed Rabbi Sugarman, who was the rabbi after Rabbi Rothschild at the temple, he told me the most beautiful story. When Hosea Williams was dying, he was holding the hand of Reverend Jesse Jackson, and they were holding hands and they were praying over Hosea Williams. So you don't have this image, but here Hosea Williams was dying, and they were holding hands together because they knew they were in the struggle together.
I want to call another scene from the movie, and that was a moment where we saw Dr. Heschel staying over at Dr. King's home. Sleeping under the same roof, eating the same meal together, like sharing that intimacy, that reality of each other. That's so important. This is, Dr. Durley said it from the very beginning. Understanding, respect, and trust. It's really hard to hate somebody who you trust. It's really hard to disrespect somebody when you understand them. You can't be an ally and you can't be an accomplice if you haven't broken bread together.
That's right.
If you haven't seen the world through another person's eyes. If I don't have, Reverend Mondane tell me what it's like to drive a car as a Black man in Portland, Oregon, and sit, Pastor Hennessy talks about this all the time and really said it to me very personally, right? What does it mean to be someone who's known in the community, who's prominent, who speaks, knows everybody, and yet every time he gets in the car, he's a Black man behind the wheel, and he better not be speeding, because any encounter with the police could be the end of his life. I need to hear that story. That's not my story. That's not my experience. And it's only when I've heard this, when we sit together, when they understand each other, what is your lived experience, that all of the things that divide us fall away, and we just see each other as people, and we hear those lived experience, and we say, you have to say, that's not right. And I'm going to go on the battlefield with you because that's just not right. And that's what we have to do together. And all of these other things there's racism in the Jewish community. There's anti-Semitism in the African American community. It's there. It can't be ignored.
That's right.
But we can't let those things divide us. We can't say, I don't want to talk to these people because that's a racist institution. These are all the ways that people try to divide us from each other, but I can't divide brothers. You can't divide sisters. I know you too well, and none of that stuff is going to get in the way.
Yeah.
But if I can ask another question, what about the people who don't have this kind of access? We're in a world with so much disinformation. I mean, today, the former Speaker of the House blamed the protest, or said that the protest movement was being funded by George Soros, right? So I think, and it leads to a question that a number of people asked, can you suggest concrete action steps that people might take? People who don't necessarily, Jews who might not be able to go out and meet a Black person or break bread with a Black person, or conversely, a Black person who really doesn't know any Jewish people. What can people be doing to create these bonds and combat disinformation, which is all around us, as we know, at the very highest levels?
I think it's
Get out of
already
your comfort zone.
That's what I was going to say. Exactly right. Getting out of that comfort zone and realizing what's happening now. People are realizing, possibly for the first time, that it's just not this subgroup, that all of us are under the oppressive nature of what's going on. Here in Atlanta, 2 months ago at the Temple with Rabbi Peter Berg and Josh Lesser and Ron Siegel, we started, are you ready for the name of this? Anti-white supremacist group. And we're meeting there, and we've been meeting, and the first person we had in there, I brought a person in there who was a David Duke follower. And he came, and we wanted to understand what was going through his mind so we could both learn, and then he could go back and infect somebody else, infect those in his group that are saying, wait a minute, they are not all like that. But it starts, first of all, I've got to recognize that I've got some growth to do. I had to really grow. And I use this example sometime when now we're talking about gay, lesbian, queer, and all this. I had to grow to that because I came up, if the person was gay or homosexual, I was in that now till I began to understand. But what did I do? Ken Brandt and a lot of here, where I'll be in a wedding, I say 2 men, 2 women, but I had to grow. Once I began to understand where they were, where they're coming from, then I could begin to go back and even women in the ministry in the Baptist church. We didn't have them. We segregated against women in the Baptist church. We were out there fighting for civil rights until, and I mean, I got butchered when I ordained 4 or 5. Reverend Montaner, I ordained women here in Atlanta 30 years ago, and I got butchered. I got thrown out of the society. Now it's coming. So it's a matter of we recognize it, and then what are you willing to sacrifice at risk and bring others to come back to have that kind of conversation about, it starts with me, then it starts with Rabbi Conahan and others. That's what it's going to take.
I remember Zenona Clayton, who you saw in the movie. She met with the head of the KKK, I don't know, for a whole year straight. Every day she'd keep going back and meeting him. And by the end, he totally came around. So I'm just saying, bringing back this Dr. King's beloved community and how Atlanta understands the best, and the relationships that develop there, is that we have to know that human beings, we all have this ability to become racist. None of us are free of this. But if we constantly work at this and know that we have all a responsibility to elevate each other, bring the light into each other, have these difficult conversations, and it just makes you feel better to be a part of making the world a better place.
So we have a couple questions. One is sort of in a historical context, and then one is more current. I'm going to try to combine them. So I know the film touched on this a little bit. Where was the falling out? What happened between the two communities that there was this falling out back in the late 60s and 70s? And then also looking more currently, there's a question about if, in fact, our partnership was based on back then on a common history of oppression and exclusion. How do we get past the fact that Jews are no longer excluded in the same way as Black people? Although I will point out that, of course, we are the targets of hate crimes more so than any other religious group. Have we become white, part of white privilege, and how do we get beyond that in order to be, Pastor Montaner, the kind of accomplices that you are speaking about?
You know, one of the things that James Baldwin brought to light was the assumption that the common narrative that if Jews could make it in American society, in American society, then presumably so could Blacks. But this assumption ignored the fact that Jews were white. What we have to understand, like Pastor Kahana, Rabbi Kahana was speaking of, is moving beyond the paradigms that says that they're the same lived experiences. My lived experience is going to be different from your lived experiences. So just again, having that conversation with each other and understanding the real struggle of what are the disparities? Why isn't there access? Why isn't there inclusion? Why is the wealth gap so broad? How can we help close those? I want to invite 4 Jewish friends every week without even knowing you to come to my restaurant and eat in a private dining room, COVID-free, yep. And just have a conversation with you about what it's like to live in these Black shoes.
I love it.
Oshines is going to change the world.
We reached a point in 1968 where we moved, when Stokely Carmichael and other groups, right after the Poor People's March, self-help. We as Black folks, we got to look out for ourselves. Jews have been looking out for themselves. They started their own schools. We had the historically Black colleges, and we started thinking, wait a minute, why do we keep going and they're not going to do anything for us? Let's do it. Somebody asked the question, what happened to the splitting? And we started saying, so Stokely Carmichael and the Black Panther Party came about. And in 1968, 69, and we started saying, well, let's do it for ourselves. And then at the university level, and I was a dean at University of Illinois at the time, we wanted Black studies, we wanted Black food, we wanted Black dormitories. We didn't want your help. We wanted that kind of element. So it began to split up and said, look, James Brown said, open up the door, I'll get it myself. And the songs and the movement and the hairstyle and the African dress, it says now we're going back to the roots and we're going to do it ourselves. So the Jews started saying, well, if they're going to do that, so the Jews are doing that, and we started coming apart like that. That was one of the real reasons. It was a self-help era, that we were going to do it for ourselves. And I think a lot of that contributed to it. And now we understand that we're coming back, I think, full circle, that nobody can do it by him or herself.
Well, you know, Dr. Durley, it was 12% African-American constituency in the United States of America during the Civil Rights Movement. Mm-hmm. Today, it's 13%. Yes, we are a powerful people. Yes, we are resilient people. I wrote another op-ed piece that appeared in the New York Times, I believe, that talked about the resilience of African-American people. We are a resilient people. However, we need that wind beneath our wings. Now, we've got to understand that HBCUs were founded and funded by our Jewish constituents. So it was proof text to the fact that we can't just do it by ourselves, even though we're powerful. We need the help of those that have a greater presence, the access, and the prestige to push us right along.
But just at the same time, during the 60s, when Black was beautiful and the empowerment of the Black community gave Jews the feeling that here they were nervous after the Holocaust, even though it was 20, 30 years later, they could then put, their kippahs on. They felt like they could express their Judaism in a more outwardly way. Yes. Now, sadly today, how many Jewish kids, how many moms want to give their Jewish kids Jewish stars? Or you see what happens with the Jewish people that are wearing their kippahs. They're in more of a dangerous position right now. Whereas in the 60s, with the Black empowerment, the Jews felt more comfortable to show that the pride of their own Judaism. But today, it's a much different situation because there's anti-Semitism on the rise too. Even though our skin is white, if there's any showing of the Jewish, whether it's the Jewish rabbi, whether it's the kippah or a Jewish star, you're in a more dangerous position. So we need to communicate also that as well, so that we can both really understand our own fears too.
Yeah, there's so much that needs to be unpacked in that conversation. And the history of it is really important. I think that notion of empowerment that started with Black is Beautiful and did reflect into the Jewish community and a certain sense of Jewish pride, because Jews had been trying for the decades before that era to be accepted, to be white. And it's important. We do have to be very careful, because it's absolutely true that not all Jews are white. And we have to be, you know, and the whole Ashkenazic perspective that we want to assume is the monolithic Jewish community is not accurate. It wasn't accurate then, and it's not accurate now. But as a group, Jews have been accepted into white community in a way that they weren't in an earlier era. And that has become very precious for Jews. We don't want to give that up, and there's real fear of that, and that's stoking some of the racism that had been inherent in the Jewish community throughout all this time. This was not a monolith that all Jews were supportive of the civil rights movement or of Dr. King. Right? My father's congregation was very, very angry at what he was doing. Atlanta, the synagogue in Atlanta was bombed, and the members of that congregation were not thrilled about that fact. And were not happy that their leaders were out there marching, and didn't feel that this is something Jews should put their lives on the line for. It is complicated. Nothing is monolithic. And it is really important in this era, as we are recognizing the racism that this country has been built on and has been perpetuated, and that we have been a part of, that we Jews who are recognized as being white in this country are part of that system, are complicit. Some of us are really taking advantage of that, have become successful in that system. And I think that's part of the break, because just as Jews were starting to see themselves as white, African Americans were starting to see Jews as white. And you're on the other side. You're part of the enemy. So I think much of what needs to be done, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. The African American community does have to confront the anti-Semitism that's inside of it. The Jewish community absolutely has to confront its own racism, and it has to has to recognize those of us who do present as white, how that makes us pass in the world, and how we take advantage of those systems, and how we have to confront that racism as a part of our reality, and what we need to change in our nation, because it's wrong. I don't think, Bob, part of your question was predicated on this issue of our own oppression, and I think that's not a safe place to be. I think that's not really what we should be talking about as a Jewish community, that we're sensitive because we were oppressed in the Holocaust. I understand why that was real in the civil rights era. It was only a few decades since. But that's not what we need to base this on. We need to base this on compassion, understanding, on seeing the world through another person's eyes, and it comes from personal encounter, and that work has to be done. And it's getting back to our question. People who say, I don't know how to do that, find a way to do that, right? There are churches that are welcoming, that want to have white people come in and be a part of that conversation, that want to have Jews. We as a Jewish community here in Portland are building those opportunities. And we see that as a great thing. Like, it's wonderful to come into my synagogue and celebrate the Martin Luther King Shabbat. It's great and it's meaningful and it touches the soul. And what are you going to do afterwards, right? What are the personal human connections that you're going to build? It's not that difficult as I think it seems.
Some of the greatest lessons I learned was around the Seder dinner. At the Seder, when we were doing the bitter roots, and we were sitting there and we were dipping, and everybody, well, taste yours, and the bitter herbs and all of that tradition. As I've gone to several Seder dinners, and you can learn so much. I took my children at the time, my daughter, and she still thinks about that when we were taking, and this is well, she's 48 years old now, but she remembers when we were going to do that about 20 years ago. And it made such a big difference. And I was totally lost, but why do you do this? But everything we touched had a meaning and a significance, and I could relate it to what we were going through. And I think that that's very, very important. And I think we've got to get back to that kind of camaraderie, if you will.
Reverend Durley, I have to say, based on that, you're talking about the Passover dinner. Dr. Susanna Heschel says, a week after Dr. King was murdered, he was supposed to eat Passover dinner at Rabbi Heschel's for dinner. And he said to Rabbi Dresner, Dr. King said, what I really like about the Jewish people is that they don't look at their slavery as victims. They use the slavery they use the slavery to be compassionate. It's a responsibility to be there for other people. So the victim, it's not the slavery to just be victims, it's to be empowered, to be active. The social justice, it's to be there. So just like with the Black community, that it's the empowerment, it's to be proud that it was terrible what happened when Blacks were brought to America. Jews came here, but Blacks were brought, but to use that slavery so that there's a responsibility for other people, not to have a hate speech, not to let other people be enslaved. So it's to use the pain for the responsibility and to show up for other people. So
you know what I found interesting, what Rabbi was saying is that Sherry Frank, whom you know, Sherry Frank, her family was from Savannah, Georgia. And when you go back, and I had to go back and really research it after she talked about it, many of the Southern Jews did not get involved in the movement that was here. They were Northern Jews that came down because they didn't want to lose their businesses. They didn't want to lose their shops. So many of them, they had to, as he said, pass, and they were more with the other establishment. So there was that's why Heschel, those that came from the North were the ones that were setting up many of the freedom schools and funding and coming in. Many of the Southern Jews did not put themselves out on the line at that time. And this is what she was teaching me, her family.
That's very true.
That's why you see Rabbi Saul Berman in the movie arguing with the Jewish rabbis there who said, Rabbi Saul Berman, you came here from the North. You're putting our life in danger here in Selma.
Yeah.
We have to live here and you have to leave. And Rabbi Saul Berman said, you know, it's been 20 years since the Holocaust. And when other people remain silent, we can't do this. So there was an argument among the Jewish people in the South with some of the rabbis from the North. So the point is that it's not all people, but there's enough of good people that can work together, that can use our history for coming together today, now more than ever, because it's an exciting time that the world cares about this racism right now, and we have this opportunity to use this for good.
I guess we could be united in spirit, come.
Yeah.
Very good. So I know we are sort of running out of time, but there's one last question. I know we didn't get to so many of the questions that were asked, but we apologize for that. But there's one very specific. I'm looking at Pastor Mondane in particular. As you know, the Proud Boys plan to return to Portland on September 26th with a rally. What can we do together to get our city's leaders to really listen and take action to avoid this dangerous chaos and hatred and violence?
Who's coming back? Who is that group?
The white supremacist group.
Oh.
Called the Proud Boys.
Proud Boys.
Proud Boys? Okay.
And they come armed.
Oh.
The last time the Proud Boys came to our town, there's a radical rabbi that her name is Deborah Kolotny. She had a Shabbat down at the riverfront, and they invited me to come as well. So both of our congregations, the NAACP showed up. And the Proud Boys were on one side, and we were on the other. And we talked about unity, and they talked about division. So I think that we have to make a louder noise as part of the problem, and we have to become unapologetic and extremely deliberate, strategically, and very thoughtful about how we stand together regardless of our oppressors.
Rabbi Kahana, did you want to add anything?
I know that was beautifully said. I think that you know, white supremacy is dying, and it's going to be loud in its dying, and there's no future in it.
No.
So you know, we're going to have to have these times. This isn't new. This didn't start with the murder of George Floyd.
No.
Right? Portland's been dealing with this, fascists and anti-fascists facing each other down. But Pastor Mondane, I just love the image that came up in my mind as you were talking about it, where these two sides and then a group of people sitting together and having dinner between the two sides. That's the story. That hatred cannot stand up to friendship, to knowledge, to understanding, to respect. It simply has no future.
Sherry, when will the film be made available widely to the public?
Hopefully in the near future. Right now, we're primarily going from state to state and using it as an educational platform. And what's really exciting is that these Jewish film festivals have become community events. So like the NAACP is involved in churches, and that's what I'm so excited about. Is there's nothing that feels better than bringing people from different backgrounds together to talk about real issues, about love, about hate, about how we all have racism in us, how we can work together. And I just feel so proud to be a part of this. And this is an example. Look at your community. While there's you know, you're coming together, and I'm just so proud and thankful for you guys picking our film and for this great conversation. And let's just continue this. I know you guys are doing great work, but where our foundation is doing some work is we're going to be highlighting all the organizations around the United States that are working in Black-Jewish relations, putting the articles up so that if people want to know what's going on, they don't feel so isolated. They can see there's great work going on, whether it's the Andrew Goodman Foundation, and then you can find out where you can get involved. Because some of us feel isolated, we don't know, but look at what's going on in your community. I'd love to have as much information that you can share with me, and then they can come to spillthehoney.com and see what you guys are doing. So if anybody's inspired by the film or by what you guys are doing, call the Federation, call the Holocaust Museum, call the Reverend, and have dinner at his restaurant. He also has antiques that somebody might be interested in buying. Seriously. So I'm saying, you know, I'd love to, I want to see those antiques. Reverend, can you tell us about you have an antique shop that, you know, I think would be great for us to learn about. And
I don't have the antique shop anymore.
I used to. Okay.
But I do still sell vintage glass, and we could online. It's called Amazing Glass. But I'm more interested in sitting down and having the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And having dinner at Poshines.
That sounds great.
I just want to compliment those of you in Portland for the work that you're doing. It's so important. My next door neighbor at one time when I was in high school, he became the mayor of Seattle, Washington, Norman Rice. He grew up next door to me in Denver, Colorado. I left Denver and went to Nashville. But I want to compliment the group that what you're doing. This is why I feel optimistic about what you're saying and how you're doing it and coming together. And those who are watching today, that it's not just a Frankenstein movie. When I used to go to the movie, and I'd be shaking when I was in the movie, but when I went outside and saw the sunshine, I forgot. But I hope that what we've been discussed here and what you're doing in Portland, I will be talking about you all right here in Atlanta, Georgia, and what you're doing there. I think it's just fantastic. And Sherry, thank you so much for I remember when you were first starting with Spill the Honey. I thought that was a crazy name, Spill the Honey. And but then I began to understand that a pot of honey, it's sweet, and all that honey is there. And when you get it in, then it spills over. And it's interesting, when Spill the Honey rolls over, it goes into all of our lives, and our lives can be sweetened by the honey that you put together in this film.
Thank you. And think about the image right in Portland, that there's a Holocaust museum with Congressman John Lewis in all the windows. Just think about that image, that that hear the history of the Holocaust, and Congressman Lewis, who was a spiritual warrior with Reverend C.T. Vivian, he is in the windows there. That is a symbol.
And it's spilling over. It's spilling over. It's spilling over.
So I want to first thank everyone for joining us tonight. Special thanks to Reverend Dr. Durley and Sherry Rogers. It's almost midnight for them, and of course my colleagues Reverend Mondane and Rabbi Kahana and Judy Margles. And I also want to give a shout out to Gail Mandel from the Oregon Jewish Museum, and also Rachel Nelson, who's both of them behind the scenes running tech and making sure we're doing everything right. And so shout out to them. You know, we say in Hebrew, tzedek tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And that is the basis on which I know our community will continue this very important work in partnership with folks like Reverend Mondane. I want to remind everyone that we will be having a webinar on October 6th. So another partnership with several organizations, including the NAACP, the Oregon Jewish Museum, several other minority community organizations. That's October 6th, 7 p.m. You'll be getting information about that soon. You can register. That is with Walida Imarisha, who is just a phenomenal activist and author and public speaker, who will be taking us through the really shameful history of anti-Black racism in the state of Oregon. And again, it's an opportunity to learn that history so that we can figure out how best to deal with those current issues around systemic racism and hatred and anti-Semitism. So please look for that notification. There will also, I believe there'll be an article in the Scanner tomorrow, which will talk about our United in Spirit. So look for that as well. And Judy, unless you had some closing remarks.
I just want to also offer my thanks and really ask Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley and Dr. Rogers, please come to Portland when this pandemic ends. We would welcome you with open arms to have you in our city. So
as long as we can have dinner with the Reverend at his
We're
restaurant.
going to Coshines, absolutely. First stop. It's fairly near the airport, so it's perfect.
What's the name of your restaurant again, Reverend?
It's Poshines, Poshines.
Okay. That's where we're going to come. Yeah.
Thank you.
So yes, good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Can I do just 30 seconds on something?
Absolutely.
Whenever we would come together on a meeting like this, whether we were getting ready to march in Selma or Birmingham, I'd like to end with a Christian prayer and a Jewish prayer, that our minds and our hearts would not only just be the words that we've uttered, that it would go down from a spiritual nature. And so I'd like maybe offer a prayer and somebody else as we close tonight, just something very simple. Eternal and almighty, divine, righteous God, we thank you for this moment. We thank you for this Kairos time. We thank you, God, that those on this call thought it not robbery to spend time and the energy. Thank you for listening to us and allowing us to speak to the masses. God, we thank you for your love. We thank you for your care. We thank you for all that you're doing. Now, God, we ask that you would bless this nation. God, go up to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and rattle the windows, rattle the doors, go inside and make a difference. Touch our young people and continue to give them the courage to stand out there on the street. Thank you for the work that the NAACP and the Jewish Federation and the museum that they're doing there in Portland. Continue to put the wind beneath their wings. Give them spiritual encouragement to never turn back, never bow, never break, never back up, and be that kind of force that will make a difference in the lives of all of those that they've been called to serve for justice.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Wow.
Well, probably the most important lesson that I could learn is never to speak after a great preacher. So I'll only offer very simply, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, God of our ancestors and God of our descendants, you who created us in all of our many and varied and beautiful diverse ways. You taught us at the very beginning of our Torah. You've taught us at the very beginning of the Old Testament that we are created in your image, your incredible diversity and oneness. You who encompass all of us and hold us and see us as children, all
Yes.
equally important in your sight. May we have the ability to rise above our pettiness and all of our simple and meaningless divisions, and find the true humanity in another, the humanity that reflects your divinity. May we be brothers, may we be sisters, may we be
Yes.
friends, may we understand, may we respect,
Yes.
may we trust. Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Good night.
Good night all.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night all.
Program. Wonderful.